What happened to Dr. Claudine Gay and Dr. Candia Bailey? Weathering. It just opened up my eyes. Premature aging of the cell, really and truly racial discrimination. Whew. What a past couple of weeks it has been, at least for Black women. Let's get into it. When I was 18 years old, I made the brave decision to come to the United States to pursue a higher education. So I came for college, but it wasn't until about 2 years later I began to understand the reality of what it's like being a woman, being a Black woman, being an immigrant Black woman, actually in the States and like navigating at this country. This realization came to me surprisingly in one of my classes at school. I went to this predominantly white institution at PWI, but it was very engineering focused, and so I was excited to take one of our 3 liberal arts classes that we had for our entire curriculum. Anyways, to make a long story short, we ended up analyzing different articles, short stories, videos, and books. And the story that jumped out to me was of this Black doctor. So she was a Black doctor actually practicing. She got pregnant, she was married, and she was about to give birth to her child. She was about in her early 30s, so she had done college, she went to med school, she was kind of like in her career, and now she was ready to have a child. And the story goes into her entire birthing and pregnancy experience up until she has her child, but she doesn't, because at the end of the story she passes away. The narrator of the stories was actually her mother, kind of detailing how her daughter kind of cried out for help, was trying to get care, and in being a doctor herself was kind of telling her care team, her medical team really, what symptoms she was facing and why she felt that she needed to be either put on bed rest or she needed to be seen. At the end of the story, the mother pointed out that not even being a doctor could save her own daughter. And I don't know, something about that story stuck with me. My lovely professor used that story to introduce to us the term weathering, which is loosely defined as the wear and tear of the body and premature aging of the cells due to psychological stress, in layman's terms. And because of weathering, Black women will not be their chronological age, but would be their biological age, which is an older age because of chronic stress, basically. This Black educated doctor died due to weathering. So not even being a doctor herself could have spared her from weathering, from really and truly racial discrimination within the health system where she was. The weathering hypothesis was proposed first by Arlen Geronimus in 1992. It holds that African American women's health deteriorates in early adulthood as a result of their cumulative exposure to socioeconomic disadvantage. So basically what that means in real life is that racial discrimination is literally threatening the health of Black women, according to this. And when I heard that story, it just kind of like opened up my eyes, and that was like a theme that we discussed throughout the semester in class. And I also found out that the more you're introduced to spaces that aren't really occupied by people that look like you, in this case like a higher social class or a higher education, or just even quite literally attending at PWI, that can basically accelerate the process. And I want to use that as the lens through which we look at these 2 situations that happen. One, the resignation and quite literally like assassination of her career of Claudine Gay, and 2, the passing of Dr. Candia Bailey of Lincoln University. I think these 2 highly educated women in very senior posts at their university kind of experienced some sort of social, emotional, mental weathering. I kind of think of this metaphor when I'm trying to understand weathering and just like the effect of racism and sexism on women and women of color. It's kind of like a stone in a riverbed. So like the water is continuously rushing by and passing by in the river, and if you stand there and look at a stone, it looks impenetrable. It's hard, and one drop of water will do absolutely nothing to that stone. But over time, with pressure and a couple million more droplets of water, crevices start to form, and before you know it, you have a completely new route for a river to flow through to a valley. And this is the lens that I want to look at what happened to Dr. Claudine Gay and what happened to Dr. Candia Bailey, weathering these women in extremely high academic careers experience some sort of psychological, social, career-wise weathering, and we're gonna talk about it. So let's first set the stage. Let's kind of bring everybody up to speed on what happened. So if you don't know, Dr. Claudine Gay was the first Black president of Harvard University, the 30th president of Harvard University, but she's also a professor of government, a political scientist that started her career there in 2006. So she'd been working there for almost 20 years. Shifting gears to Dr. Candia Bailey, she had also had a fantastic career in student governance, student affairs at different universities, and decided at this last post that she had to return to her alma mater, which was Lincoln University, to serve as the VP of Student Affairs. Another thing that I think is important for us to mention is just the whole system that they were in. So the system that they were in was academia, and unlike other areas or other careers that are kind of blatantly maybe sexist or blatantly prejudiced or racist, all the other isms, I think academia kind of like slides under the radar sometimes because everyone is kind of in their own little faculty, and so they're able to either climb the ranks or get some solidarity in those different subgroups that they're in. So starting with Dr. Claudine Gay, I think the areas that she may have experienced like significant layers of like pressure and discrimination were obviously in her tenure at Harvard University. But I think what added her to injury was the fact that it was such a prestigious university and what she represented, because the history of that university is one of prestige. It's not necessarily the cleanest. Let's just leave it there. And so for them to have a president that looks like her, is a woman, and is a Black woman at that, is kind of, to me, signifying like a change, or that signifies some sort of tide turning, to me at least, with Harvard being the most prestigious university in the United States. Some may argue that, but I felt like her being the president kind of symbolized that it was becoming no longer just a old boys club, and it was shifting into something different. And I felt like that's why there was a lot of pushback, whether people wanted to admit it or not. And there are a few things that happened that people would say kind of like hit the nail in the coffin, and it was one, her reaction to kind of like the congressional hearing and the questions that were asked of her, and two, the fact that she plagiarized, that she was plagiarizing on her dissertation. Does that even sound right? Anyway, I don't want to look at these two things separately because they are separate and they aren't. What I'm trying to say is that because she was a Black woman in such a high position, regardless of what she did, people held her to a higher standard. Shifting gears a bit, Black women experience intersectional oppression, basically, which is best explained kind of like in a metaphor of like an invisible knapsack. And in our invisible knapsack, we don't really have any privileges. Some other males or white males or people that are not of color, they can kind of have like backpacks that have like privileges, different networks, things that they're allowed to do that other people aren't necessarily allowed to do, different power. Claudine Gay didn't have anything in her invisible backpack. Because of that, she wasn't allowed the same grace that I think would have been allowed to any other president or any other person that wasn't a Black woman in that specific position. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. I'm pulling up a post here and let's look at it. So this is from the New Yorker. This journalist interviewed one of Claudine Gay's peers. Actually, they interviewed the person that they said Claudine plagiarized. And the question asks, what role do you think race has played in the scrutiny of Gay and in her resignation? So he basically says, after looking on the conservatives, person who basically was pushing for her resignation, he said the following: seeing the language people used, even some of their account names and symbols, I have no doubt that part of the hostility toward Claudine results from racism. That being said, I was even more struck by the amount of misogyny. After the comments were publicized, the number of responses attacking his masculinity actually jumped out to him, calling him a beta male and that he had been emasculated because he had allowed her to plagiarize him. And then he even went as far as to say people just assumed she was a lesbian even though she's married to a guy. And yeah, so this is just really driving home the point that she was scrutinized on the basis of her being black and a woman, and the double whammy of those two, being a black woman. No one knows what other microaggressions, latent discrimination, prejudice, racism she had already faced to get to the post that she was currently in as Harvard president. And we're only seeing this peak. I'm not sure if it was just her decision, but if it was only just for her mental health, I am glad that she resigned and can return to some level of normalcy. Thankfully, the weathering that Claudine Gay experienced in, I guess, her career didn't lead to her harm physically. Maybe it led to her harm emotionally. But we're gonna shift gears and talk about the possibility of another black woman experiencing weathering in her workplace that led to her demise, really. So when I was researching about Dr. Antoinette Candia Bailey, there are only positive things. There are only happy stories of her working with students, of her sorority, people saying that she was a great, happy, joyful, impactful woman. At first glance, I was just like, that sounds like any overachieving, go-getter black woman. It looked like she had checked all the boxes. She had her bachelor's, her master's, her doctorate. She was working in a career that she loved. She even returned home to her alma mater, her HBCU, Lincoln University, to give back and serve there as the VP of Student Affairs. What's alleged is that she had been facing like workplace bullying by her superior, which was the president of Lincoln University. The first thoughts that popped into my mind when I saw that part was this was just another case of people viewing black women as just strong, superhuman, and being able to just handle it all. It makes me think about what the current state of affairs is and or view towards like mental health, because it said that she had emailed a couple times talking about her mental health and needed to take time, and was terminated when she was going to take some time for her mental health. And it makes me wonder, where's the line drawn? Who is allowed to take mental health days and prioritize their mental health, and who isn't allowed to? And I think we both know the answer to that question. What I did find interesting was that this was an HBCU, but the president wasn't a person of color. And I know that could probably be stereotypical, but it made me wonder if that had anything to do with Dr. Candia Bailey losing her life. It really does. I'm wondering, had it been a person of color, a black person, a black man, a black woman even, would she have felt safer? Would she have been granted that grace to take the time off? Would she have been bullied? We don't know, but these are all questions that I'm sure everyone has. So a part of the discourse that I was also seeing online with regards to Dr. Candia Bailey's passing was that it was in relation to bullying and her not having like a great work life. Comments were sounding kind of like, oh well, you know, it was just work, why couldn't she just leave it? Like, why was it such a big deal? I don't think people realize, one, how much of your life work takes up. Two, people do not live in vacuums. We do not exist as one-dimensional beings. And I think those microaggressions or overt harassment and bullying that she experienced were the straws that broke the camel's back. And in this case, it wasn't something that was slow. She didn't weather or wither away. It went as far as taking her own life. It went as far as her committing the act. And so weathering is real. I hope that made sense. I hope that if you're a black woman watching this, you take the time and know that you're allowed to feel, you're allowed to take your mental health days. Your mental health matters too. It's not just for some people. And I want to know, what other areas do you think that this can be applied to? What other areas, what other subgroups of people do you think experience weathering? I'm sure it's not just black women or women of color. And this brings up another question that I'll answer in my next video, of women in general just being told and taught as girls that we can do anything. But I'm not sure if as women, can we do anything? Like, we're empowered, we're great, strong girls, but as women, like, where are the systems to support that? So I hope you'll join me in that conversation when I do release that video. Happy to hear the thoughts below, and I'll see you in my next video. Until then, with love from Chels. Bye.